Ryan Carter had always been the quiet one, the one who sat in the back of the classroom, the one who faded into the walls like a shadow. At 16, he had mastered the art of invisibility. The school didn't notice him, and he preferred it that way. He knew his place, and it was far away from the spotlight. But it wasn't the quiet that bothered him. It was the way the world saw him, or rather the way it didn't. Every day, Zach and his crew made sure Ryan was reminded of his status. Today was no different. Zach's voice broke through the low murmur of the classroom. "Hey, Carter," he sneered. "You're still alive? Thought we buried you under those books of yours." Ryan felt his chest tighten, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He didn't answer. He never did. Words weren't needed. The others snickered. A few threw glances his way, just to see him flinch, to see him shrink. But Ryan didn't. His eyes stayed fixed on the pages in front of him, the words blurry and meaningless. They weren't real anyway. His reality was the silence, the numbness of being ignored, and sometimes the pain that came with it. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but Ryan didn't move. He stayed seated, watching the others rush out. They didn't notice him. They never did, and that was fine with him. He was invisible after all. Ryan was halfway through lunch when he heard it. The deep hum of helicopter blades cut through the usual noise of the schoolyard, turning heads. A few students stopped eating, eyes widening as the sound grew louder. He sat at his usual spot, alone at the back of the yard, watching the skies with a mix of curiosity and indifference. Helicopters weren't a common sight in the small suburban town. It was unusual, sure, but not entirely out of place. At least, not for someone who wasn't paying attention. Ryan had learned to ignore the extraordinary, but then it landed. A black military-style helicopter, sleek and intimidating, settled onto the school's football field. The crowd around the area paused, their conversations dissolving into whispers. Even Ryan found himself staring as the helicopter's engine slowly quieted down. From inside, a tall, broad-shouldered man emerged, his silhouette framed by the helicopter's hatch. The crowd parted as he stepped out, every eye on him. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize the man, but his presence was undeniable, commanding. Then it hit him, his uncle, Jack Carter. Ryan had only seen Jack once or twice in his life, but his uncle's reputation preceded him. He was the kind of person who wasn't easily forgotten, and yet Jack had been an enigma to Ryan for as long as he could remember. The mysterious uncle who never stuck around long enough to explain himself. Jack was a man of few words and even fewer visits. Ryan could count the times he'd seen him on one hand, but each encounter had left an impression. Jack's world, whatever it was, seemed distant and unreal to Ryan, like something out of a movie. But now, seeing him land in a helicopter at his school, Ryan couldn't help but feel a strange mix of confusion and awe. His uncle's eyes locked with his from across the yard. Ryan's breath caught, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and the students slowly returned to their classrooms, their whispers trailing off as they left the yard. Ryan remained still, his gaze fixed on his uncle, who was now speaking with the principal in the distance. He didn't know what to feel: curiosity, confusion, maybe even a little apprehension. He had always felt disconnected from Jack, as though the man was a stranger, despite the shared blood between them. When the final students trickled back into the building, Jack turned his gaze toward Ryan. There was no surprise in his expression, just that cool, steady look that Ryan had remembered from the few times they had met. It was almost as if Jack had been expecting to find him here, waiting for this moment. Ryan's heart raced. He had no idea what to do. He didn't even know how to approach his uncle, let alone what to say. So he did what he always did. He stayed quiet, trying to blend into the surroundings, but Jack's eyes never left him. Slowly he made his way across the schoolyard, walking with purpose, cutting through the small crowd of students like a man who belonged in a world that didn't seem to fit Ryan's. The tension in the air was palpable as Jack neared, and the weight of Ryan's uncertainty pressed down on him. "Ryan," Jack said, his voice deep and steady. Ryan flinched slightly at the sound of his name, his gaze dropping to the ground. It felt like the moment had stretched too long, as if the entire world had paused for this conversation. Ryan's mind scrambled for words, but all that came out was a strained, "Hey!" His voice felt small compared to Jack's commanding presence. Jack looked at him, taking in the awkward silence before speaking again. "You're doing well here, I see. Not much has changed." Ryan didn't know how to respond to that. The words felt hollow, disconnected from the world he inhabited. Jack was a stranger to him, a piece of his family that had always been out of reach. Even the way he spoke was different. Ryan could sense that Jack was holding back something, some truth he wasn't ready to share. But then again, maybe Ryan didn't want to know. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever Jack was hiding. Jack seemed to sense his discomfort and dropped his voice slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here, though," he said, his eyes flicking toward the school entrance. "You look like you've been avoiding things." Ryan shrugged, unsure how to explain the constant undercurrent of tension he felt every day. "Not much to avoid, really," he muttered. "It's just school." Jack's expression softened for a brief moment, and Ryan could have sworn he saw a flicker of something familiar in his uncle's gaze, something that wasn't quite sympathy, but more like understanding. "You don't have to hide, you know," Jack said, his voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "There's more to this world than just being invisible." Ryan raised an eyebrow, looking up at him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "What do you mean?" Jack took a step closer, lowering his voice even further, though there was no one else around to hear. "You have the ability to do things, Ryan, things you probably don't even realize. But first, you need to understand how to control them." Ryan's confusion deepened. He had no idea what Jack was talking about. "Control what?" Jack smiled, but it was a tight, guarded smile, as if he had shared a secret and wasn't ready to explain it all just yet. "We'll talk more later. For now, keep your eyes open. You never know when the world might change for you." Ryan stood there, feeling both intrigued and slightly uncomfortable with the conversation. Jack's words lingered in the air, heavy and enigmatic. The moment felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its most important piece. But before Ryan could ask anything more, Jack turned and started walking toward the school's entrance, leaving him standing there, unsure of what to do with the strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. As Ryan watched his uncle disappear into the school, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, but he had no idea how or why. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Ryan's mind was too occupied to focus on anything. His thoughts kept circling back to his uncle's cryptic words. "Things you don't realize. Control them." What did that even mean? And why had Jack shown up now, of all times? Ryan felt a mix of frustration and uncertainty, like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't quite understand. When the bell rang at the end of the school day, signaling the start of the afternoon break, Ryan felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. He had to go to his locker, pass through the crowded hallways, and somehow make it to his bus without being noticed. The thought of facing the same old bullies made his stomach turn. As he walked toward his locker, he caught sight of Zach and his crew. They were laughing as usual, but this time there was something different in their energy. They spotted Ryan, and as if on cue, they broke into that obnoxious grin. Zach led the charge. Well, Zach said, blocking Ryan's path. "Look who's here, Mr. Invisible himself. What's up, Carter? Did you think you could hide out forever?" Ryan tried to keep his head down, his fingers wrapping around the edge of his locker. He wanted to say something, anything to shut them up, but the words never came. Instead, he just stared at the floor, feeling the familiar heat rise in his face. Zach wasn't done. "Oh, what's the matter? Cat got your tongue, or are you just scared of us?" The taunting continued, and Ryan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The usual mix of humiliation, anger, and helplessness swirled inside him. He couldn't escape it, couldn't escape them. Every word they threw at him felt like it cut deeper, but there was nothing he could do. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to scream, to throw something, anything to make them stop. But he didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he did what he always did. He stayed silent, wishing for the moment to pass, for the world to just swallow him whole. But it didn't. Zach took a step closer, and Ryan could feel his breath, hot and mocking, on his face. "You know, Carter," Zach continued, his voice lowering, "you should be grateful we even notice you. You're so boring. I bet you're the kind of kid who spends his weekends reading and hiding in his little cave. Pathetic." A few of Zach's friends laughed behind him, and Ryan's heart clenched. He had no way of fighting back. His body was frozen, and his mind raced, desperate for an escape. Suddenly, he heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Before he could even react, a strong, deep voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Jack Carter's voice was unmistakable, and it carried with it an authority that instantly silenced the entire hallway. Ryan's head snapped up. His uncle stood at the end of the hallway, his tall frame radiating confidence. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, as if the entire school was holding its breath. Zach and his friends froze, caught off guard by Jack's sudden appearance. The sneer on Zach's face faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Nah, no problem, just messing with Carter here. You know, he's a bit sensitive." Ryan didn't say a word. He could feel his pulse quicken, but he didn't move. He wasn't sure whether he should be relieved or embarrassed by the sudden intervention. Jack took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I don't think this looks like just messing around, Zach. I suggest you and your friends keep walking." Zach hesitated for a moment, but with one last glare in Ryan's direction, he turned and walked off, his friends reluctantly following. The hallway slowly returned to normal as the tension broke, and Ryan was left standing there, unsure of how to feel. Jack's presence had cleared the space, but the weight of the moment still lingered in the air. Jack turned to Ryan, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You okay?" Ryan nodded, though his mind was racing. His uncle had intervened, but there was no mistaking the silent message. This wasn't over. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The sound of Zach's mocking voice still echoed in his head, but now there was something else, a strange feeling that he couldn't quite shake. Jack had intervened. He had stepped in with such authority, with a power that Ryan had never seen before. It left him feeling confused and oddly protected. That night, after dinner, Ryan sat in the living room, alone. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. His parents were out, something about a work event, and it was just him and his uncle sitting in a silence that felt heavier than it should have been. Jack had been quiet all evening. He'd said very little since the encounter at school, but Ryan knew something was coming. His uncle was a man who didn't talk much unless it was important. Ryan had always been intrigued by Jack's presence, but it was clear now that there was more to his uncle than he had ever imagined. Finally, Jack spoke. "You're probably wondering why I'm here." Ryan nodded but didn't speak. His fingers drummed nervously against the armrest of the couch. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever answer Jack had. The uncertainty gnawed at him. "I didn't expect to find you in this situation," Jack continued, his tone calm and measured, "but I think I can help you. I think you've been ignoring something about yourself for a long time." Ryan's heart raced. His mind immediately went to his school life, his inability to stand up to the bullies, his constant retreat into silence. Was Jack talking about that? about how Ryan had always been the quiet one. But Jack wasn't done. "You've got potential, Ryan. More than you know. I see it. I've seen it in people like you before. People who have the ability to control more than just their environment. People who can do things others can't." Ryan felt his pulse quicken. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his stomach was flipping with nervous energy. Jack leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as if searching for the right words. "You've got something inside of you, something powerful, but you've kept it buried. You've kept it hidden. It's part of who you are, and until you learn how to control it, it will control you." Ryan was silent for a moment, trying to process the words. Something powerful? The idea felt alien to him. All he'd ever been good at was staying unnoticed, blending into the background. He couldn't even control his emotions most of the time. How could he control something else? "I don't understand," Ryan muttered, almost to himself. Jack nodded slowly, as though expecting that answer. "Most people don't understand at first, but you will, in time. I've seen it before. I know how this works." Ryan stared at his uncle, unsure whether to believe him. It felt like a story, something that didn't belong in his world. "Why me? Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know you're capable of more than this life of silence," Jack replied, his voice steady and sincere. "You've always felt like you don't belong, right? Like you're invisible. But that's not who you really are. You're more than this. But you need to learn to control it, to embrace it." Ryan felt a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, or fear. Was this his chance to change? Was this the thing he'd been waiting for, without even knowing it? "But how do I start?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked him in the eyes, his gaze unwavering. "We'll take it one step at a time. But the first step is realizing that you're not just some ordinary kid, and when you start to believe that, everything will change." Ryan leaned back in his seat, absorbing the weight of his uncle's words. He didn't know what he was supposed to do with this new information, but something inside him stirred. For the first time in a long while, he felt like there was a way out of the life he had been living, a way to finally stop being invisible. The next day at school, Ryan felt the weight of Jack's words hanging over him like a storm cloud. "You're more than this." He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big. But there was also fear gnawing at him. What if he couldn't control whatever it was inside him? What if Jack was wrong, and all he was destined for was to remain the silent, invisible boy? By lunchtime, his anxiety was already boiling over. The moment he stepped into the cafeteria, Ryan felt that familiar pit in his stomach. It was like walking into a lion's den, but this time, the lions were waiting for him. Zach and his friends were already sitting at their usual spot, and their eyes locked onto Ryan the moment he entered. Ryan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the temperature rise around him, the air thick with tension. He had no way out. His hands trembled and his mind raced, but nothing could prepare him for what was coming. Zach stood up, a sly smile playing on his face. "Well, look who decided to show up," he sneered. The others chuckled, egging him on. "Thought you'd just sneak away again, huh, Carter? Not so fast." Ryan turned his head slightly, trying to keep his face neutral, but inside, his pulse was skyrocketing. He wanted to shrink away, to retreat into his shell like he always did. But Jack's words were still echoing in his mind. "You're not just ordinary. You've got power. You need to control it." Suddenly, one of Zach's friends, Kyle, pushed Ryan's tray off the table, sending his lunch crashing to the floor. The room erupted into laughter, and Ryan's face burned with humiliation. His hands clenched into fists, his entire body tense. The old Ryan would have just stood there, silent and defeated. But something inside him shifted. Something began to stir. "Get up, Carter," Zach taunted, stepping closer. "What are you going to do about it?" Ryan's gaze flickered to the floor, where the remnants of his lunch lay in a messy heap. His breath came in shallow gasps, and for the first time he could feel the pressure building inside of him, like something was about to burst. The old voice, the voice that had kept him silent for so long, whispered in the back of his mind, "Just leave, just go." But another voice, quieter but more powerful, spoke louder this time. No more running. Ryan looked up at Zach, his eyes meeting the bully's with a sudden, unexpected clarity. He wasn't invisible anymore. The weight of all those years of silence, of hiding, came crashing down on him. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. Jack's words from the night before ran through his mind. When you start to believe that you're not just some ordinary kid, everything will change. In that moment, Ryan didn't care about the laughter, about the sneers, or about the crowd. He only cared about one thing: taking control. With a burst of energy that seemed to come from nowhere, Ryan stood up quickly, knocking the table back in the process. The sudden movement caught everyone off guard. Zach, momentarily startled, took a step back, his expression changing from amusement to confusion. Ryan didn't wait for him to recover. He stepped forward, his body tense with an unfamiliar power. His heart was pounding, his breath quick. But there was a clarity to the moment that he had never felt before. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was here. He mattered. "Enough," Ryan said, his voice strong and steady, surprising even himself. He wasn't sure where the words came from, but they felt right. "I've had enough of this, all of you." The cafeteria fell silent. Everyone watched, stunned. Even Zach seemed to falter for a second, his smile fading. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick. Ryan looked straight at Zach. "I'm not your punching bag anymore. I'm not your target." For a second, everything froze. Then, without warning, Zach scoffed and took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can stand up to me? You're nothing, Carter." But Ryan didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He felt something surge within him, an intense energy that he couldn't explain. "This is it," he thought. "This is the moment." Before Zach could make another move, Ryan closed the distance between them. He wasn't thinking anymore. He wasn't hiding, and he wasn't afraid. The power inside him was growing stronger by the second, but just as quickly, a cold wave of fear washed over him. What if he didn't know how to control it? What if he lost control and did something he couldn't undo? But then, in that split second, something snapped. A force, a push, like a sudden gust of wind, burst from Ryan's chest, knocking Zach backward. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to send him stumbling, his feet losing balance as he fell against a nearby table. The cafeteria was completely silent now. Ryan stood there breathless, staring down at Zach, who was now flat on his back, wide-eyed and panting. Ryan's chest heaved, his heart pounding as adrenaline surged through his veins. He had done it. He had acted. And as the realization hit him, his mind raced with the possibilities. What else could he do? What more was inside of him? Jack's words echoed in his ears. "Now you've seen it. You've felt it." But before Ryan could process everything, Jack's voice rang out across the cafeteria. "Well done, Ryan." Ryan turned, his body still tense, his heart racing. His uncle was standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with a proud but knowing look on his face. The cafeteria was silent. The table was knocked over, the scattered trays of food and empty milk cartons strewn across the floor. Zach lay sprawled on his back, staring up in disbelief, while his friends looked equally stunned, unsure of how to react to what had just happened. Ryan stood at the center of it all, his breath heavy, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His hands were still clenched into fists, but he didn't feel anger. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, but now it was mixed with something else. Control. Power. But not in the way he had expected. He had done it. He had stood up for himself, and yet the more he looked at Zach, the more he realized there was something more to this moment. Something deeper. This wasn't just about fighting back. It was about proving something to Zach, to himself, to the world. Zach slowly sat up, shaking his head as though trying to clear away the shock. The bully's eyes darted between Ryan and his friends, who now stood awkwardly at the edge of the scene, unsure whether to support him or stay out of it. Finally, Zach stood, brushing the dirt and food off his shirt. His arrogance was still intact, but there was a hint of unease in his expression. "You think that was impressive, Carter?" Zach sneered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "You really think you've won just because you pushed me over?" Ryan's lips curled into a slight smile, not of amusement, but of something much sharper. "This is it," he thought. "The moment to prove what I'm really capable of." "No," Ryan said quietly, his voice steady. He could feel his body still, his mind calm, in complete control. "I don't think it was impressive." He took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Zach's, unwavering. "But I do think it was necessary." The crowd that had gathered around them, watching the standoff, began to shift, sensing the change in Ryan. The usual tension of bullying was gone. Now all eyes were on him. He wasn't the invisible boy anymore. He wasn't the kid who kept quiet and let others walk all over him. Zach tried to laugh, but there was a nervous edge to it. "You're still weak, Carter. Nothing's changed." Ryan didn't flinch. "What's weak, Zach, is hiding behind cheap insults and picking on someone just because you can. That's weak." His voice didn't rise. It was calm, controlled, but his words were like daggers. "What's weak is pretending to be something you're not, just to fit in with a crowd that's too scared to stand on their own." There was a pause, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath. Zach shifted uncomfortably, his eyes narrowing. "Shut up, Carter!" he growled, trying to mask his discomfort with more bravado. But Ryan wasn't done. "You don't get it, do you?" Ryan continued, his voice colder now. "You think that just because you've got a group of idiots following you around, you're powerful. You're nothing. You're just a bully with no spine hiding behind your so-called friends." Ryan glanced at Zach's friends, who had been standing by, unsure of whether to speak up or not. "And they're just as weak as you are. They're all scared of what might happen if they actually stand up for themselves." Zach's face flushed with anger, but it was different now. There was no confidence in his demeanor. He was rattled. Ryan's words had cut deeper than any physical confrontation could. He could see it in Zach's eyes, the uncertainty, the doubt, the realization that Ryan wasn't the easy target he had once been. Ryan took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The cafeteria had gone completely still, the air heavy with anticipation. Ryan was no longer the quiet, invisible boy. He had stepped into his own power, and with it came the ability to do something far more dangerous than anything physical. He had control, not over his enemies, but over himself. "I'm not the one hiding anymore, Zach," Ryan said, his words deliberate, as though each one was a final blow. "You are. And when people like you get exposed for what they really are, they lose everything. They lose the respect, they lose the followers, and they lose the power. And when that happens, they're left with nothing but their own cowardice to hold on to." Zach's face twisted with fury, but he couldn't hide the uncertainty that was now clear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, Ryan raised a hand, silencing him. "No more." Ryan's voice rang out in the silence. It was calm but firm, and it made everyone in the room take notice. "I'm done. We're done." He turned his back on Zach, not out of fear, but because he no longer needed to prove anything. He had already won. As Ryan walked away, he could feel the eyes of the entire cafeteria on him. There was no applause, no dramatic cheer, but there was something more powerful than any of that. Respect. A deep, quiet respect. And Jack, standing by the door, watched silently, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to say anything. Ryan had done it. He had found his strength, and more importantly, he had found his voice. The days that followed Ryan's confrontation with Zach felt like a blur. The world around him seemed different somehow, brighter, fuller. It wasn't because the bullying had stopped. No, it was because Ryan had stopped allowing it to define him. His perspective had shifted. He had stood up for himself, and in doing so, he had found something far more valuable than victory: control. At school, Ryan was no longer invisible. The once awkward silence that followed him in the halls was replaced with a new, quiet confidence. People looked at him differently. Some of the old bullies, like Zach's friends, now gave him space. Others, more timid and unsure of themselves, had started to gravitate toward him. It wasn't just his physical presence that had changed. It was the way he carried himself. Ryan's focus shifted as well. Where he had once been preoccupied with avoiding conflict, he now used his newfound confidence to help those who were still vulnerable. There were other kids at school who endured the same kind of treatment he had. Quiet, isolated, struggling in the shadows. He could see them now, and he couldn't ignore them anymore. He would sit with them at lunch, making small talk, offering support when he saw someone being picked on. He didn't need to raise his voice or be loud. His calm demeanor and the quiet authority that had come with his transformation were enough to make a difference. One afternoon, as Ryan was helping a shy kid named Ben stand up to some of the other students who had been making fun of him, Ryan felt a sense of pride he had never known before. He wasn't just helping others, he was actively changing the culture around him, piece by piece. The little acts of kindness and support were adding up. Later that evening, Ryan sat with Jack in the living room. The air was calm, a gentle evening breeze coming in through the window. Ryan leaned back in the chair, the weight of the past few days sinking in. He had learned so much about himself in such a short time, and yet a question lingered in the back of his mind. "Uncle Jack," Ryan said quietly, "I feel like I've changed. I don't know if I can go back to being the way I was, but is this it? Have I really won?" Jack looked at him, a soft smile on his face. "No," he said simply. "This is just the beginning." Ryan frowned. "But I'm not scared anymore. I can speak up. I can stand my ground." Jack nodded. "That's true. But remember, Ryan, true strength isn't about one moment of courage. It's about the ability to continue moving forward, even when the challenges get harder. What you've done so far, it's just the first step. There will be harder battles ahead, and they won't always be physical. Some will be mental, some will require even more control." Ryan absorbed his uncle's words, feeling a mix of pride and uncertainty. He had changed, yes. But Jack was right. He knew this wasn't the end. "You've got potential," Jack continued, leaning forward. "And now you've got the tools to shape it, but you'll need to use them wisely. The real test of your strength comes when the world tries to make you forget everything you've learned, when the bullies come back in different forms. Will you keep your head clear, keep your control?" Ryan nodded slowly. "I think I can do that. I want to do that." Jack smiled, a proud glint in his eyes. "Good, because the true challenge is just beginning." Ryan felt the weight of his uncle's words settle inside him, but this time he wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, he knew he was ready. The school hallways had never felt so vast. Ryan walked through them with his head held high, his posture straight. The whispers that once followed him were still there, but now they didn't faze him. He had changed, and the power to choose how he walked through these halls, how he faced the world, was entirely his own. Every step he took felt deliberate, not out of arrogance, but from a deep inner confidence. He wasn't the target anymore. He wasn't the invisible kid hiding in the back of the classroom, trying to shrink into nothing. He was someone who had finally realized the strength he had inside. Ryan paused in front of his locker and glanced around. He didn't feel afraid anymore. The bullies, they were still there, but their hold on him had evaporated. He didn't need to fight back physically. He didn't need to prove his strength with fists. His words, his intelligence, and his ability to control himself had done more than any physical confrontation ever could. And that was something far stronger. As he closed his locker, he caught sight of Ben walking down the hall, his face a mix of gratitude and newfound confidence. Ryan gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. It wasn't just about standing up to the bullies, it was about empowering others to do the same. Jack's words echoed in his mind. True strength comes when the world tries to make you forget everything you've learned. Ryan was ready. He wasn't naive enough to think the world would be easy. There would be challenges ahead. But now he understood something essential, that the real battles were never about physical strength. They were about the strength of mind, of spirit, and of knowing when to stand firm and when to walk away. As Ryan walked out into the open air, the weight of the day seemed lighter. The sun shone down on him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He had claimed his own life, and with it, he knew he could face whatever came next. This was just the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Ryan now understood one simple truth. He was no longer just surviving. He was living, and he was in control. The future stretched out before him, full of endless possibilities. And Ryan, with his newfound strength and clarity, was ready to embrace it all. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Also, feel free to leave a comment below letting me know what you thought of the story. I'd love to hear your feedback.